Hey, this is Anand Shimpi from AnandTech.com, and you're looking at the HTC Flyer. This is a 7-inch tablet. It's got a 1024 by 600 screen, and we're looking at it here in portrait mode, but of course it also rotates landscape as well. You can only rotate it in two different directions, so you can have the HTC logo facing up or the camera facing up, and the reason for that is these capacitive buttons here only, they'll rotate, but they only rotate obviously in those two directions. So it's slightly more limited than most Android tablets, but again, not that big of a deal. The big feature here, before we get to the digital pen, is HTC Sense 3.0. So you get a little bit of a preview of here at the lock screen. To unlock, you just take this little ring and you can drag it up and you unlock. Or, and this is actually a really, really cool feature that I would like to see implemented on every single tablet, you've got 4 really quick shortcuts here. So if you want to jump right into the web, calendar, email, camera, whatever, you just grab the icon, drag it into the ring, and there you go. And it's really the quickest way of entering anything straight from the lock screen across any platform, Android, iOS, Playbook, what have you. And I think it's an excellent feature. It's something, like I said, I'd like to see implemented everywhere. So you've got that. If you go to the home screen, if you unlock it normally, this is the weather widget that HTC ships on the device. Looks pretty similar to HTC Sense from previous phones, previous devices. You do have a row of shortcuts here. This is your All Apps button, and apps are of course organized into all of the apps, as well as just the ones you've downloaded and anything you use frequently. It's pretty useful. On this side here, you've got the Personalize button. This is where you can set individual scenes. So if you go to the home screen, you actually have 8 home screens on the Flyer by default. And these home screens can be home to tons of widgets. So here's a calculator widget. Here's the My Shelf widget for ebooks, videos, people, and of course the default weather clock and all this stuff here. Now if you want, you can go into scenes and you can select from a predefined scene. So let's say you want a travel scene. You can apply that, and then by default you now have world time on your main home screen. Right, so it just shuffles around the configuration, the default configuration of the widgets, which is kind of nice. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of just tons of widgets and tons of home screens, but I can totally see the benefit from a customization standpoint. You can of course also define your own custom scenes, and you can also get more. So HTC has several more online that you can download. And there's the default one, we'll just use that. Another change from previous versions of Sense, when you keep scrolling, it's kind of an infinitely scrollable list. Whereas before you would hit an end and you'd have to kind of scroll backwards. But now that no longer happens. Unlike Honeycomb tablets, you tap and hold home to bring up your recent apps list. There is no kind of pop-up menu, but this honestly works just as well, if not better. There are some changes to the actual applications themselves. So the browser, for example, is an HTC customization on the default browser here. It's still WebKit based, but there are some changes. You do get tabbed browsing. So it's kind of Honeycomb-like. Overall performance is pretty decent. You'll also notice that by default, all web pages are actually displayed at 1024 wide. So when you're viewing in portrait mode, you don't actually get the fully zoomed out web page. You just get this kind of single strip here, which does work reasonably well for web pages like AnandTech that have a 600 pixel or smaller main content area. So without actually zooming out in portrait mode, you can kind of fit everything you want to fit here. Obviously the experience is much better in landscape mode, but you just have to do a lot of horizontal scrolling. There are a lot of elements of HTC Sense 3.0 that heavily borrow from Honeycomb, and one of those is what happens when you pull down the notification shade. So you've got your typical notifications here, you've got recently used apps right here, and you've got this quick settings tab. which actually is a lot like the quick settings you get on Honeycomb. So you can control brightness, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, so on and so forth. It's a nice addition. Given that this is just running Gingerbread, it is nice to that HTC is learned from what Google introduced in Honeycomb and has actually backported a lot of that stuff. Now, of course, the big feature here is this little button here. So you've got 3 capacitive touch buttons here: home, menu, and back. There is no search button, but there's this 4th one that doesn't actually work if you use your finger. And for that, you need the HTC Scribe. It's a digital pen, and if you take the pen and tap anywhere, it'll actually take a screenshot of that. Let's do that again. So you can be on a web page, for example, just scrolling around normally, tap, and now we have a screenshot. Once you're in this mode, you can annotate, you can do pretty much whatever you want, and if you use the pen to tap this little pen icon here, you can bring up a little toolbar for changing colors, changing the type of pen you're using, changing the size of brush. Obviously, you probably want to do more than just deface the website, but you get the point. The other thing you can do is it's got built-in history. You can also erase from the pen itself by holding down this button and erase. And when you're all done, you can save your screen grab to the Notes app. Or you can even, let's try that again. You can even share it via pretty much anything. Print it or just throw it away. So that's one option. The other thing you can do with this pen is you can just take notes. So if we pick a pen that makes sense, pick a size that makes sense, and pick color. And so that's actually one of the biggest issues with this. If your pen doesn't hit first and your hand hits first, sometimes that brings up the keyboard, which you have to back out of. But if you hover your hand over it, there you go. Writing actually works pretty well. The feedback you can probably hear, it doesn't obviously feel as good as paper for obvious reasons. It's plastic rubbing on glass. But it does get the job done. You can use it to take notes. It's kind of frustrating for me. I kind of find it more useful as an annotation tool. But in a pinch, or if you're just lightly jotting down notes, this works very well. The other thing you can do in this Notes app is you can record audio, you can insert images, and all of this syncs to Evernote. So you'll have a cloud backup of it, and you can access it from other Android, other iOS, or Mac or PC devices as well. So it's actually really, really useful. If you can get used to the whole writing with a digital pen thing versus a pen and paper, this has to be the pretty much the first tablet that can really be used as a productivity device, which is impressive. I don't think it's perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, at least for the niche that this is useful for. If you're a student, if you're someone that's constantly in meetings having to take a lot of notes, it definitely has potential there. The other thing you can do with this pen is you can use it when combined with an e-reader or an e-book. You can, of course, annotate pages, and by holding down this lower button, you can highlight passages. So the cool thing about this is it also works for PDFs. So if we go in here and go to our PDF viewer, see if I remember my alphabet, PDF viewer. So for viewing a PDF, you can do the same thing. You can highlight, let's see, and we can add. And we can even save this. So this can be saved as a brand new PDF with all of my changes and annotations in place, or you can save it as a multi-layer PDF. So it's actually really, really useful. Again, I view it as very much a niche product in that sense, in that it's I don't know how many people want to be doing this with their tablet, but if it's something that appeals to you, this is pretty much the only solution on the market today. And you can use this as your erase tool, as well as holding down that button there. So it's pretty straightforward. Architecturally, this is also kind of interesting. Internally here, you've got a single core 45 nanometer Snapdragon. It's running at 1.5 gigahertz. So if you do the math, it's about 50% faster, or it is 50% faster than all of the other Snapdragons on the market today, except for the newer dual core stuff. And that's kind of interesting because when we first looked at NVIDIA's Tegra 2, which uses 2 Cortex A9s, NVIDIA told us that, clock for clock, you're getting about 20% better IPC, instructions per clock, out of the Cortex A9 versus a Cortex A8. So if you look at a 1.1 gigahertz Cortex A9 versus, let's say Scorpion or Cortex A8, let's assume that those perform on a single-threaded app at about, the equivalent of 1.2 gigahertz Snapdragon or 1.2 gigahertz Cortex A8. What that tells us is that this platform with 1.5 gigahertz Snapdragon, it can actually be faster in single-threaded tasks, and that's what we end up seeing. Things like web browsing, individual application usage is just pretty snappy. I would say comparable to what you would expect from a dual-core A9 honeycomb-based tablet. And that's pretty impressive. When this thing was first announced, I thought, hey, maybe this is not exactly the right decision on HTC's part. But I actually think it works pretty well. You don't really miss the dual core. Of course, the one advantage you get from that you don't get here is in situations where you've got a background task running that's eating up CPU cycles. On a dual core platform, you do have 2 cores to kind of consume instructions from 2 separate threads, whereas here the scheduler has to kind of juggle multiple threads across on a single core, and that can make things slower. But I would say overall the experience is pretty similar. Scrolling, browsing the web, I'd say performance it can definitely be 20% or so faster on a dual core honeycomb tablet, but it's not always noticeable. And I definitely wouldn't say that HTC made the wrong decision with going with 1.5 gigahertz single core here. And like I said, in many cases, particularly with web browsing and using an individual application that might be CPU bound, it's not really noticeable. Flash performance is good. Web browsing performance is decent. Scrolling isn't as smooth as we'd like, of course, but it's totally a usable experience. And I think that's what was most surprising to me about this platform, about the Flyer. I thought the digitizer, I thought the digital pen was going to be a gimmick. I thought the note-taking, the annotation, I thought all of that was just going to be gimmicky. And it's not. It's definitely, these are niche features. These are things that I don't see myself using personally. Maybe I would have when I was in school. And in certain environments, if I'm traveling a lot for business and constantly in a situation where I have to record voice, record audio, and kind of jot down little notes here and there, I can see this being useful. It's not for me. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than expected. And the big thing for me is that HTC is trying, that we have a lot of innovation on the software side. Like I said, the lock screen alone is something that major players in this industry, Google, Apple, Palm, these guys need to adopt stuff like this, and you have HTC, a mere device vendor, actually coming up with some of this stuff on its own and introducing it, which I think they deserve credit for. So there you have it. It's the HTC Flyer. It's better than expected. I think all tablets today are pretty much niche products. Some are great for web browsing and email. Some are great for, like the iPad, for its plethora of apps. And the Flyer is great for the digitizer. It's great for the digitizer and its form factor and for what it is. So it's another option on the market today. My recommendation is still to wait and let these things mature. They're still pretty expensive. This thing starts at $499. The digitizer is another $80 on top of that. So I'd like to see what comes out in the next couple of years here. Again, we're operating on a super Moore's law curve here, right? So we're getting tremendous increase in performance and in feature set every 12 months. And as a result, depreciation isn't going to be so great on these things. So if you can, hold out as long as you can. But if you can't, and you're looking for a 7-inch tablet that kind of suits these niche features, the Flyer isn't half bad. Like I said, not perfect, but definitely surprising. So kudos to HTC, and if you want the full review, check it out at anontech.com. Thanks and take care.